Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Writers Chat. This is the place where writers like to gather, and we talk about all things writing, about writing, for writers, and by writers. We're really glad you're with us today, either live. We got a lot of our regulars in the chat room, or if you're watching the replay, because we know a lot of you do catch this later, or can't always join us every Tuesday morning. But we gather weekly here on Tuesday mornings, and so we're glad to see everybody. My name's Jean Wise. I'm one of the co-hosts. Missed you guys last week while I was on vacation, but I'm glad to be back with everybody. And I'm joined today by my co-hosts, Bethany Jett and Johnny Alexander. So I'm going to turn it quickly over to Bethany, and she's going to introduce this week's topic and our special guest today. So go ahead, Bethany.
Hi, everybody. So I'm super honored to be introducing our guest, Lindsey Hartz, with H-A-R-T-Z, which I think is a really cool name. And,
Thank you.
Reading Lindsey's bio on her website at lindseyhartz.com, it's very interesting. She's worked with some amazing publishers, some amazing people. Lindsey, your background is in corporate marketing, which I'm so jealous. Like, that's amazing. And she did project management for a Fortune 500 company. And she's just got a lot of experience. And I love that she's taking that and bringing it into like book launches in the Christian market too. And so just as a personal note, Lindsey, we've got 3 books releasing in the next 2 years. And you were the one our publisher recommended going after to help with book launches. Let's just say, like, I have had personal recommendations from publishers that Lindsey is the person to help with this. So I cannot wait to just take notes and just learn from you.
That's
today.
awesome. Thank you. That's exciting.
Take it away.
Well, I say I'm excited too, because I'm doing a book launch right now. I've got another one coming up in April, the end of April, and yes, ready to take all kinds of notes. Thanks, Lindsey.
No problem.
So let's talk about okay, so there's lots of things that we can do, and I definitely want to talk about things that we do wrong. And then at some point today, I want to make sure we talk about the difference between getting a launch team and then having a bunch of influencers who are ready to help, because there's a difference there, and that's something we were talking with our publishers too, and kind of the direction we're heading is more influencer based for launch than like the traditional book launch. So like, just teach us, Lindsey. Ready to learn.
Yeah, I do. I definitely have bullet points that I kind of separate out. The very first thing that I want to talk about for all of you that are here and that are in the process of writing or launching a book, the very first thing I tell all my clients is it's very important to approach the business side of marketing and launching a book, but don't forget the reason that you wrote the book in the first place, right? A lot of writers are writing out of obedience to a message they feel they've been given to help people. And part of my personal testimony of faith was based on a book that I picked up in a Christian bookstore years ago. So as a non-believer, I picked up a book that literally changed the trajectory of my life. So one of the things that I try to represent in my business and why I run this business is very much based on my looking at my life then and really trying to align it with purpose. So don't discount the ripple effects that your work has, whether you see immediate splashy results, right? Or kind of that long-term effect. So that's just my word of encouragement that I try to tell everybody, because I'm living testimony of someone who is changed by a book.
Wow.
Okay?
Love that.
The second thing is, I'm not going to go too much into this in detail because it kind of focuses more on the marketing than the book launch. But the biggest obstacle I see authors face is that they haven't done enough pre-work for their launch. So in my mind, the very first thing that you all need to consider is that you have to have the right marketing mindset. And that's really understanding that social media and email campaigns and pre-order offers and all that sort of thing, those are tools available to us in order to reach more people. But at the end of the day, all we're doing is being obedient to the message we've been given to share, right? So just kind of having that balance that you're not promoting yourself as a person, you're promoting a message that's really hopefully going to transform people's lives. And I feel like having that mindset constantly every day when you're starting out on this gigantic to-do list for marketing and launch. And I do this myself, by the way, because I run multiple launches, right? So imagine you all doing one and I do like 10, right? So sometimes I have to sit here and go, okay, I love this, I love this, I love this, especially when I'm getting buried in administrative stuff. But I will tell you, it's really important to just start your day with that perspective, because it makes all the to-dos a little less overwhelming when you realize why you're doing it. Make sense?
Yes, I love that.
Awesome. In terms of, what to focus on before your launch, the two areas that I really push people to focus on have to do with the mindset we just talked about, but also this whole influencer identification and outreach. Now, in my world, I identify influencers as high-level influencers and micro-influencers. That doesn't mean anybody is better than the other person. It's really defined by the long-termness of their platform. So if you have someone who's been in ministry or been in business for a while and has a very established audience and platform that would fit your book, they would fall into that influencer realm. Micro influencers are usually people that are in the same kind of season you are in your writing, or one or two steps ahead of you. So it's really important when you're figuring out who you're going to connect with to possibly share about your book and collaborate with them as partners to also share their resources, that you're looking at both levels. Again, a lot of people go after the higher level influencers, and that's great, because if, Lisa Turker shares about your book, that's pretty awesome. It gives you kind of a splash, right? And think of this as like a lake, throwing a boulder in versus skipping rocks. Okay, so like Lisa Turkis would be a boulder. You throw a boulder into the lake and it's a huge splash and it's awesome for that day. Most of your influencer list should be built of the micro influencers, because you're basically skipping those rocks and the ripples continue and continue, but you're also doing something to help them, which builds relationship. So it's not just asking, can you do this for me? It's let's see what we can do together. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, I love that image too.
Yeah.
And I just think that is a great image to remember, but we need a little bit of both. Do you any idea about numbers, or ratios, how we should plan that?
I usually, when we start these influencer lists, we start with 100. And some of this is tailored to the author. So I don't tell authors, go pick 100 people to reach out to. The first thing that we do is we look at the book and we figure out who the ideal audience is that we're going to focus our marketing efforts on. There's a difference between the readers that you want to reach with a book message and the readers that you want to market to. Marketing is really about segmenting your audience and focusing the benefits of your book to that particular segment, right? So for example, I recently worked on a book called Hope in the Hard Places by Sarah Beckman. And this book is about serving people and coming alongside them when they're experiencing hardship, practical ways to help people. But it's also about the people experiencing tragedy. How do they take the next right step forward? So what I just described are two different marketing angles. And we have to define what that is before we start any part of a book launch, because it will inform everything from your lead magnet to draw readers to your email list for your book launch. And it will also inform your marketing efforts, what you're going to do on your website, email campaign, etc. It will also inform the influencers you're reaching out to. The key with influencers is you have to work to overcome obstacles. And the first obstacle is your book needs to make sense for their audience. It can't be a self-serving type of thing. Oh, you have a big audience, I want to reach out to you. You have to understand who you're marketing to in order to select your influencers in the first place. So that's kind of the beginning part of the work. And the second piece is really understanding what your relationship is with that influencer. So we do a ranking, and this sounds kind of funny. And remember, some of this is marketing speak. This is going to be my marketing background coming through. Okay. There's a lot of heart and soul to what we do, but there's also a lot of strategy that we have to implement to make sure we're connecting with the right people. So we literally will rank the relationship that the author has with these influencers. And it can range from a very, very strong relationship to literally none. And when I describe it in the notes for my clients, I put, like strangers, stranger danger, because the reality is we don't always know the people that we're going to reach out to. And that's part of what makes planning for the launch less overwhelming, because then we focus our efforts on the people that we have the strongest relationships first, and then go down the list, because those people that are acquaintances or strangers, those take time. You have to build relationships. You have to see if there's a good fit. You have to see if there's a response. And so a lot of times people that are outright strangers, we don't even use for a pre-launch. It's an after launch, after we've spent 6 to 9 months building relationships.
Wow. And I'm thinking that I should be creating this list of influencers now, even if I don't have a book ready to launch.
Yes.
So I'm building those relationships. So it's something we should always be working on as a writer.
That's exactly right. And I actually use this in my own business. I have my own list of influencers and micro influencers of people that I want to partner and collaborate with for various reasons. And I've had it for, the business has been a business for 6 years, and I've had it for at least 3 years, 4 years maybe. And the important thing to remember about this is sometimes my authors are like, okay, this just feels weird. I'm just listing a bunch of people's names and trying to figure out how I can use them. That's kind of how it feels, right? Yeah. But the key is, as a project manager, as someone who is a creative who loves to write, but my whole career was project management and organization and segmenting all this stuff into a plan. To me, it makes sense to really carefully consider and evaluate the people that you want to align your work with. And having them on a spreadsheet, they don't need to know they're on a spreadsheet, right? But it helps you as a person keep track of where you are with outreach and with kind of talking to them and engaging with them. And there are people after a few conversations where I've realized it's not a good fit for whatever reason. And so I just kind of make that note and I move on. So for me, it helps me kind of keep track of where I am, and also to make sure I'm not overutilizing a specific influencer. So if I've asked them something, 6 months ago, I probably won't do it again unless I've made sure that I've helped them in return. Right?
Yes.
So the influencer list is something that I tell people. Technically, with a traditionally published book, you have to, on the book proposal, there's a section where, who are you going to reach out to help you? And pretty much everybody makes it up. I mean, right? I mean, I'm just saying, it's the people that you want to help you. And sometimes when you've been around a while, you do actually have actual people that will support you. But the influencer list is one step further of going, okay, despite what I put on that book proposal, who could I realistically connect with, in order to share about my book? So the influencer list is something that I refer to as a necessary or foundational marketing task for any author or speaker. Just kind of taking time. I do this about 15 minutes, 3 times a week, just to kind of, sometimes I'll see people on social media and I'll put them on my spreadsheet. And then I'll find their contact information, and then I'll just observe, which also feels like stalking people, just being honest. But again, it's so important to me that who I'm aligning myself with, has the values and treats people the way I want to treat them. So that's why I pay attention. And often before I reach out to an influencer, I've probably paid attention to them for a good 6 months. right?
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just something I do because, it's our message to steward well. So we have to be, discerning about who we're going to align with, no matter what their numbers look like, right? And that's kind of the challenging part of the industry is sometimes people, aren't necessarily who they appear to be. And you don't know that without time, right? So part of our job is to protect our message as well by really identifying the correct influencers. So I would say the second you have a contract or the second you're having a book come out, you need to start this process.
Right. Well, I'm even thinking going back to the book proposal, even before you have a book, except if we had started working on the influencers, that would fine tune that list that we put into our proposal so much better. So that it's not just a wish list of stalkers, that we're stalking. It's actually concrete, but starting to build that relationship, I think would strengthen our book proposal. We did have a question, one in the chat too, Lindsay. Somebody wanted to know if you actually have a template for your spreadsheet, or can you share a little bit about if you do it in Excel, what your columns are, so we can kind of imagine what it looks like?
Yeah, I do have a template, and it's a pretty basic template because it's not something to be overcomplicated, okay? So it's literally like, I'm trying to remember, their name, their website, email address if we can find it, which can be a little, iffy sometimes. And then I have fields for Twitter or Instagram profiles, because if you can't find an email address, I prefer to direct message people instead of using like a contact form, right? Number one, because you can see when they, read it. It makes follow-up easier. Hey, you saw my message. It makes it a little more personal. And number two, contact forms can sometimes get lost in cyberspace. So I try to find a point of contact, and sometimes we'll do LinkedIn as well, if possible. So we'll kind of cultivate or make that information on the spreadsheet. And then I have address fields, but that's usually blank at first because we don't fill that in until we've reached out to someone and gotten a commitment for them, right? So that we can send them a book. And then there's the field for the strength of the relationships. And later on, I'll put a screenshot like in the chat comments, or I guess the Facebook comments, so you can kind of see what I mean. But the relationship is, very like a personal relationship, or it could be a peer, like someone you've taught with, or it could be just someone you met at a conference kind of thing. Like all those are different stages or types of relationships, so again, when we do outreach, we always start with the strongest relationships. Number one, because they're more likely to say yes. And number two, because it's encouraging to you as the author, because you get momentum and yeses. The other thing is influencer stacking. So I'm going to give you an example of this. I am going to be hosting a marketing workshop here where I live in Nashville in May and September. And I didn't want to teach the whole thing because I'm an introvert. And so I love communication and I love teaching workshops, but the idea of sitting there and talking for 2 days straight for 8 hours is not my thing, okay? So I knew I needed to bring other people like in the Nashville area into this conference. The first 2 people I reached out to, I have very strong relationships. I didn't know if they were going to say yes, but I had very strong relationships. Once I got the first 2 yeses, then I reached out to everybody else who I didn't really know. And with these 2 people's permission, I didn't just drop their name, I said, hey, so-and-so and so-and-so are going to speak on these topics. I really think you'd be a great fit. Would you consider? Because my other 3 speakers, I know them, but they don't know me, right? Very well. So sometimes that's where that strength of relationship comes in, because with their permission, you can say, hey, do you mind if I reach out to Bethany? I don't really have a relationship with her, but I really want to get to know her. Can I let her know, that I've spoken to you and that you recommended? So sometimes you can have those connections that can kind of get you in the door, when you're reaching out to influencers. And the key with all of this is it's a strategy. And as you can tell, we just spent, I don't know how many minutes talking about influencer strategy. It's a long-term process. Yes. It takes time. and it takes follow-up, and it takes consistency, you know. So the other thing that's on the spreadsheet is the type of request you want to ask that person to do. This is also something that we kind of fill in as we go. I had a client, Susie Larson, and we launched Fully Alive last year. And Susie Larson on her Facebook page does amazing, incredible hour-long interviews on Facebook, right? So I know if Susie was a potential influencer for a campaign I'm working on, I would only ask her to do a Facebook Live, right? I have some privy information to the behind the scenes for her because I worked for her, but for you all, you can kind of tell what people love to do just by you're observing them, right? So part of the second obstacle you remove is you don't ask them to do something that they never do, right? You can tell if they're on Facebook or if they're on Instagram, if they love Instagram stories, or if they're active on their email list. And that's the research part. You need to sign up for their stuff. You need to read it. You need to pay attention, because when you reach out for the influencer connection, those personal things will help those people understand that you're not just blindly reaching out to them, hoping someone will say yes. You've spent the time to make sure there's an alignment. You spent the time to understand who they are and what's important to them. And that needs to be reflected in the pitch that you're making to them when you're asking them to collaborate with you. Okay. Any questions before I talk about why you do this first?
Well, a couple things. Annette kind of was talking about identifying influencers. Like she says her build an audience is for Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House books. With that in mind, who are her influencers? Those guys. So how do you identify the appropriate influencers? Can you give us a few tips on that?
Yeah, I'll give you a better example than cyber stalking, because that kind of sums it up. You know, so I use a website called BuzzSumo, BuzzSumo. And what it actually is an aggregate to see how certain keywords are performing. So like if I wanted to go type in book marketing, it would tell me the top posts like on social media or articles that are performing well with that keyword. Okay. So I use it for marketing, but I also use it for influencers, because if you find someone who has an article that's been shared on your topic or your genre or your book resource, it's pretty good indication that they might be an influencer. So that's kind of the first thing that I look at, whether it's a top level influencer or a micro level influencer. The second thing is I will sometimes just ask my tribe. I will say, hey, I have a marketing campaign coming out on these 3 topics. Who do you know that I should pay attention to, that I should reach out to, right? So don't discount the benefit of the current, email list or social media group that you have, of bringing them into your process. That's the other thing. So you're not just asking them, hey, buy my book or support my work. You're getting their buy-in into your process. And people get excited about that. So those are just 2 practical ways. There's a whole lot of other ways we can do it, but those are the main ones that I start with. The other thing is the author always does kind of a brain dump of everybody they can possibly think of, right? Yeah. And then my job is to help them sort through if they're actually, I was thinking the word valid, that sounds a little harsh, but just, if they're actually a good fit, if they're actually in alignment, because sometimes they aren't. And it's kind of like the editorial phrase, kill my darlings. Sometimes you have to do it with influencers too, right? Because sometimes, and like Bethany, you were talking about, you guys have 3 books coming out. Yeah. So the key with influencers is, if you know you have all these projects coming out, part of our job is to make sure that we're using the right ones for the right project.
Yes.
And not constantly asking the same people for stuff, because that can get exhausting for them. But also, always having that ongoing process of building new influencer relationships so you have a wider pool to draw from.
I think this is why it's important, like on Instagram, especially. Instagram influencers are so big. Like I was even looking up like the top, people are charging $100,000 for some of these like influencer connections. Like, yeah, I'll post this on my page, but that like it can range all the way up there because they get the results. that way. So it's one reason to always be engaging on Instagram, like you said, like building those relationships, because then all of a sudden you're not the weirdo.
But there's also the possibility to reach out to influencers without paid promotions. It gets kind of complicated. Usually the paid promotions are better outreach from a publisher, right? If you have one. You can reach out to paid influencers kind of on your own, but it does get kind of pricey, right? So for me, we tend to focus a little bit more on that grassroots, because usually my book projects have publishers attached who are doing some of that outreach, right? And with self-published works, it's a little different. It's a little harder to get into those paid promotion spots, because honestly, they're often booked by publishers very far in advance, right? But yeah, so the deal with influencer collaboration is it does a couple of things. Number one, it kind of is an automated marketing task that helps you kind of build relationships, and it helps you figure out how to partner with people. So you're not just asking for them to help you. The second thing is, if we have enough time, 6, 9+ months, oftentimes the initial ask of those influencers is for you to share something related to the theme of your book, but not the exact content, as a lead magnet. So your goal in the beginning is to build your email list, right? Not necessarily just to come up with a launch team. So when we do influencer lists, we separate out who do we want to share during the book launch season, and who do we want to tap into to present material to their audience to grow our email list, right? So you have to even further segment your influencer list to specific strategies, right? And when you build your email list, that serves two purposes. I swear I'm getting to book launch stuff. It's all tied together. It serves two purposes. Number one, the more you draw ideal readers to your book message, you can have a list launch, which is setting up an email pre-order offer campaign, an email strategy for the people on your list to buy your book. The second thing is, a lot of those people would be good candidates for your launch team. Okay. The difference between influencers and a launch team, because there is one, right? Your launch team's purpose, honestly, is threefold. Number one, it's really as an encouragement to you as an author. A lot of times these people are the first readers of your book, right? Outside of like your friends or your family or your editor. So I find it's really encouraging to my authors to see a launch team reading an advanced copy of the book and being encouraged by it after all this work that they've had to do. The second thing is, a launch team's purpose is to amplify your content on your social profiles. This is something I do specifically in my agency. So a lot of launch teams will be given images and tweets and that sort of thing to share on their own profiles. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But you have to think about what social media is and how it operates. So if I have 200 people on my launch team, and each of them have a couple hundred followers, and they share a Facebook status update or a tweet or a shareable image that I've given them to post, their ability to reach people is very minute because of the algorithms in social media, right? So I always tell my launch teams, you can share images anytime you want, but make sure you do the assignments we are giving you, which is 2 or 3 times a week, you're going to go to Bethany's Facebook page and comment and engage and tag on her book trailer, right? Go to Johnny's Instagram account and make sure you're commenting on as many book posts as you can. Because what you're doing is you're directing the power of your team, which is the numbers, to amplify that content on social media, so the algorithms will know, oh, I need to show this to more people, right? Because all these people are engaging with it. And that's the biggest mistake I see people make on launch teams. They basically just give them content to share whenever. And I'm like, no, we need to focus them, like laser focus them on sharing key content to kind of expand that reach.
I have a question, observation, something. So sometimes I feel like I'm being lazy when I just share someone else's thing instead of making it up on my own and doing it like we're doing these launch, my team doing this series of little romances. But really, am I doing better by sharing something they've already put up because of what you just said.
Yeah.
Rather than looking at my own thing and sending it out.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this on what to do with your launch team.
Okay.
But some of this is actually training your launch team how to do things correctly and explaining to them the strategy behind it, right? So I'll make a note and we'll touch base on that in a second.
Okay, great, thanks.
But yeah, that's kind of what the influencers are for. It helps you build your launch team. And then the other thing that launch teams are great for are leaving reviews, right? So you have to remember that launch team people may or may not be super social media savvy. I mean, we try to cultivate, and that's another thing I do a little differently is when we're working on the influencer lists, we also have an option of, oh, I just want them to be on the launch team. So we try to cultivate a lot of our launch team versus open invites, right? Because then it's a personal invitation, right? They feel like they've been chosen, which means they have a little bit more buy-in, right? In doing what we're asking. But also I find that, and by chosen, I don't do it off numbers, just to clarify. I don't choose people to be on a launch team just because they have 10,000 Instagram followers. We really try to align it with the message and like what kind of activity we can see from them on sharing other people's work. So if they're sharing engaging work and personal insight into books they're reading, then they're most likely going to be a good candidate for a launch team, right? So that's kind of how we start the development process of who to invite to a team. And then the other thing that's really important about the launch team, again, is understanding the purpose, which I just explained, right? And I think the last part of this is the plan. Like, what do you do with these people? Right?
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. So for me, you know, I tend to run my launch teams a little shorter. A lot of times it's 6 to 8 weeks before a release date. I will do it if the publisher or the author really, really wants to. But here's my hesitation. People, in general, we all kind of have the attention span of toddlers, right, on the internet. And it's not like we intend to be that way, but there's just so much information thrown at us. So one of the things that I really try to do is focus the team's effort to when they're going to be most active. So I typically only run my teams about 4 weeks, maybe 5. But that has a lot to do with, are they going to stay excited when we really need them to be excited, right? And so the trajectory of a launch team is people are super excited the first 10 days,
Yeah.
right? And then you have people kind of drop off. And the reality is we need most of the sharing to be happening the 2 weeks before your release and the day of. So that's why I personally only do them about 4 weeks. And the extra week is usually at the end to give people time to leave reviews.
Yeah.
So that's my philosophy. Yeah, other people will do them longer.
No,
So
but I've been in several launch teams. I get confused. It's like, okay, wait a minute, when is that release date? Because I want to be sure I have a blog post, and it's just, it becomes news as somebody that a lot of times has served on a launch team. Shorter works better for me. So I think 4 weeks sounds great.
Yeah. And the thing is it's your job as the author or a launch team manager, whether you're doing it or you have someone like me do it, or you even have a volunteer, you know, all of this really, like, to me, the hard part of book launches is all the marketing stuff, right? Mm-hmm. I literally could tell you can run your own launch team if you plan it right. Right? Because to be honest, a lot of launch members respond a little bit better, you know, to having the author in there constantly because they want that engagement with you. But a lot of authors get overwhelmed with the administrative part of it because the reality is you have to kind of be active and you have to engage with every comment to keep the Facebook group active, right? So I do set up launch teams in Facebook groups. I email them sparingly. So I might email a welcome, you know, I'll email a check-in, I'll email them, hey, don't forget release date's coming up. Here's what you can do to prepare. And I'll email release day, and then I'll email review reminders because I don't want to inundate all these people with stuff. The thing with Facebook groups, though, is that they're subject to the same algorithms as Facebook in general. So if you do not keep those groups active by posting and engaging with the comments, they're going to die. That's just the way Facebook is. So that's kind of the most overwhelming part, is you have to kind of stay engaged with those posts. The second thing is just having a plan, like what are you going to ask them to share? When I do marketing campaigns with clients, we always create 6 core pieces of content plus images. Okay. So the core pieces of content can be any combination under the sun. And some of it depends on my clients, right? Because some people love Facebook and video. Some people do not. I'm one of them, right? So, it's a matter of operating in your strengths so that you can really passionately show the true message of your book. So we might do a book trailer. We might do a teaching video series. We might do a Facebook interview series with other people, influencers, about the topics in the book, right? We might do some blog posts. We always, of course, share anything about pre-order bonuses, that sort of thing. Anything the publisher does, if you have a traditional publisher, like if they're emailing their email list or they're posting on their social profiles, we try to send the team there. So there's no cut and dried way to say, always do these 15 things in a launch, but it's really making sure that week by week you've planned at least 3 things that the team can participate in, knowing up front that not everybody is going to do everything you ask, right? At all.
I'm one of those people who usually doesn't do what is asked of her.
Well,
I'm just become a bad launch member.
No, I don't think it's a bad launch member. The reality is, your job is to read the book and share about it honestly and authentically. You do not have to flood your social media with information about a book. And so one of the things I do when I have a launch team application is I actually ask a series of questions that kind of segment the type of things a launch member likes to do. Mm-hmm. So I'll say something like, do you love video? Do you love Instagram stories? Like, it's a question on my form. And so that way I can reach out to those 40 people that said, I want to do Instagram stories, right? And I can say, hey, here's some images for you. Please do this on release day, right? So some of this is
so easy.
Say that again.
It sounds so easy when you're able to be at that point. You've done all this prep work. You've got these people. You've got the names. You've got the images. You got all that, and you can say, "Yeah, I want you to do this on release."
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah.
Yeah, and so you're always going to have people that honestly join for the free book. I mean, that happens. My philosophy on those is you never know the effect the book is going to have on them, right? Mm-hmm. So remember, you're here to serve people first, not just for them to serve you, right? So you're probably going to have people that don't do anything that you can observe, but that doesn't mean that they won't share the book with someone or they won't process it. I'm a big processor. So one of the first books that ever impacted me, as a non-believer, I don't think I even told the author for 4 years because it took me that long to process it. So you just got to kind of understand that, there's going to be people who don't follow through, but you can't take it personally. They could just be processing your book and not ready to share whatever they're feeling. And to me, that's a good thing. I mean, you want your readers to kind of experience change and have conviction and want to move forward in life. So that's the way I handle that, is just knowing going in, not everybody will share. The other thing is if you segment out into what they love to do, they're more likely to come across as passionate and not stiff, if that makes sense, because they really love to do that thing. I just feel like most launch teams just need direction, on this day, can you share this content on Bethany's Facebook page? On this day, can you go mark the book as read on Goodreads or currently reading, so people can see it. On Fridays, I have the authors do kind of like a discussion of whatever their reading was for that week. So I always separate the books out into however many weeks we have. I give a reading schedule. Not everybody follows it, but the point is to kind of give them a schedule and to give the author the ability to kind of go in there and interact with them as they read, which is a personal touch. It's not just us asking them to do all this stuff, So I just try to build that sort of stuff into my launch teams, and I try to make it not super overwhelming to where people are sick of it by the time release day comes around.
Oh, that's great. Hey, I got just a basic question. How many people should we have on these launch teams?
That's a non-specific answer also. Sorry. Okay, I have run launch teams that are 25 people all the way up to 2,000.
Wow.
I don't recommend 2,000. It's a little crazy making, to be honest, like Facebook notification for days. Here's the deal. Really what you're trying to do is just to get real people to share about your book. I would aim between 100 and 250 people, mostly because of that principle I was just talking about. Roughly 20% of the people will actually do the work, right? In its entirety. Everybody else will probably pick one or two things that they feel most comfortable in doing. And really the launch team numbers we're trying to get like at least 100 reviews, right, on Amazon. Yeah. And that has to do a little bit with Amazon's kind of the way they rank the books and the way they show them and the way they promote them. The 100 reviews seems to be a little bit of a tipping point. I say that with a full disclaimer that Amazon changes things, I swear, by minute. So, don't be like, Lindsay said 100 reviews. It's kind of a fluid number, but what we've seen is once you hit 100 reviews, hopefully a lot of them verified purchases. That's the other thing about Amazon. A lot of people get advanced copies and you're allowed to leave reviews on Amazon, but they're weighted differently than purchases through Amazon. So you have to kind of consider, like I always ask my launch team members, hey, I know you got a free book, but can you buy one for a friend? Because when you leave your review, it will count. And I kind of explain to them, this is part of the education process. I'm not trying to get you to buy books. I'm trying to help the author's message spread. And not everybody does it, but the people that do, if you can get at least, I think it's like 10 purchases, those are all the reviews that will show up on the first page, which is good for you, right? Because then it shows people actually bought the book. And there's a little bit of consumer like snap reaction. If people go to a book page that has all these reviews, but none of them are verified purchases, they're pretty savvy. They know that that's not necessarily a purchased book, that it's probably a team, right? So you just kind of have to do little things like that in order to kind of, get some of that verified stuff in there, just from the way consumers behave. Try to think
We're asked in the chat.
Taking notes.
We were asked in the chat room, if any in the chat list, that if you find difference between the written reviews or the video reviews at all
on Amazon. Yeah, I would encourage, actually, you can also do pictures of the book, which I think is a little weird. Actually, I clarify that. Pictures of the book work really well if it's a children's book and you're willing to plaster your kid's face on Amazon review, right? People just like to see, oh, the sweet little family's reading this book. But the video reviews, I'm undecided on that. Okay. I don't know. I wouldn't watch a video review. I don't have time for that, So I feel like video reviews would probably be better maximized by the author getting people to give that review as a verbal testimony and then using it for social media content or like through their email.
That's what our friend Del Didway did with his book that just came out, Dugout Devotions. So plug for Del, but he, for the 6 months before the book, he had a bunch of us at writers conferences. We didn't have the book, but we would talk about it, just a couple lines. And then they took that as part of the book trailer. And so you got to see all these people give these one or two things, but then everyone who was in there started sharing it. And so the ripple effect of it was huge because of that.
And I'm not saying, I think video reviews are great because it's a personal thing. It's not like a prescribed copy or image or anything like that. You just have to make sure that you give a little direction on what they should say, not the words they say, but what I always tell people with reviews is, number one, you're not there to talk about the author and how awesome they are. That is one of the first things that will get your reviews removed from Amazon, is if you reference any commentary about the author at all, right? Because they automatically assume that means you have some sort of personal relationship with them. So what I usually tell people to do with reviews that are on a launch team is to focus on why you wanted to read the book in the first place. Share something that surprised you about the book or moved you, and why do you think other people should read this, right? But again, don't talk about, Bethany's so amazing and I love all her work. Like, that's not the place to include that information in reviews on Amazon or Goodreads. Bethany can certainly appreciate using those on her website, right? Or her speaking events, or to send out in her email campaign talking about her book. So just some of that education, again, has to happen when you're instructing a launch team on what to do with the reviews.
Can you say those one more time, please?
Say what?
Yeah, 3 points for the reviews. So I missed the
let me see if I can remember what I said. Hold on.
Why you want to read it?
Why you wanted to read it.
Why you want to read it.
Like, what appealed to you about the book?
Mm-hmm.
What was a aha moment or a surprise moment for you in the book? And then why you feel others should read it.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing I will say about book launch teams is just to not make it overwhelming for you or for them. When I set up the Facebook groups, the very first instructions I put in there are, here's your book, because we usually give them a digital copy. And if there's physical copies that will be sent, I also address that. Your physical copies will be sent, whatever, in a week. The second thing I put in there is an introduction as who I am and why the heck they should listen to me, because I'm not the author. Right? So I just kind of briefly say, my name's Lindsey. I'm supposed to give you instructions. You ask me any questions, yada, yada, yada. And here's how you get notifications. So that's what I mean about education, just kind of explain to them. And I say, 2 to 3 times a week, I'm going to share something. Make sure you come look into the group. And by the way, here's a lovely welcome video from Bethany. Go watch it and tell her how excited you are, right? And then I make it a point to schedule something in the group every couple of days, right? Whether it's an assignment or whether it's what do you love about this chapter? Just something to encourage conversation and also to keep that algorithm going because, I'm the marketer. So, yeah. The other thing too, and this kind of plays into after the release date, make sure you try to do something personal for your launch team members, not just the book. This is time consuming, I get it. But if you have the ability to send them a thank you note, do it. I mean, people love to feel that they made an impact and that they're appreciated for their efforts. Even if you can't tell that person did anything. It doesn't matter. Just kind of reach out to them with a little bit of a personal touch. I prefer handwritten letters, which means most of my clients don't like me after book launches. But I'm like, don't send an email. Seriously, like, write them a letter. I also think during the book launch phase, you can do things like giveaways, to try to incentivize sharing. Honestly, that depends on an author's budget. Some people have the budget for that and some people don't, but the easy way, if you're going to do giveaways, is way back when you're doing your influencer list. There's kind of a theme here. One of the things you can highlight people for is, do they have some sort of product or resource that's complementary to my book or my theme? And maybe your ask of them is, would you donate whatever so that I can use it for a giveaway for my launch team for sharing? Right? Mm-hmm. So that's how to make giveaways easy, where you're not necessarily paying all this money for it, right? But you're also doing that person a favor, right? You're sharing their work with your launch team, and hopefully someone will win it, and that'll be cool. You can also ask for sponsorships for if you're associated with any sort of organization. I get this a lot with writers for like Encourage and Dayspring, Proverbs 31. Sometimes we can reach out to those organizations and, they can donate something, to share with the launch team or to give away to the launch team for shares.
These have been great ideas. A couple of questions we have is, do you have some other ideas of specific things to offer as incentives
for the launch
either
team?
For the launch team, yes.
Yeah. With larger teams, with authors that have a little bit more established ministry, launch teams really seem to love like Q&A time with them, like what we're doing here, right? Being able to get on a call and just kind of hear the author's heart and ask questions of them. It's something really simple. And you don't actually, let me clarify to say, you don't have to have a huge audience to do this. It just seems to create a lot of momentum with, kind of a mid or higher level author that's been around a while. If you have a really loyal audience and tribe that really engages with you and you are smaller or newer, you could do this too, right? But the key here is managing a little bit of expectations. The reason I have that clarification is for you as an author, part of my heart and job is to make sure that your heart's protected, right? So if you are doing, hey, I have a launch team Q&A, and like one person shows up, which, it can happen because, my job is to kind of direct you, to things that will really encourage you. So sometimes if the launch team is being kind of wishy-washy and not like as engaged, I don't always recommend that because I don't want you to be discouraged because it's not really about you, right? Mm-hmm. It's about the engagement of the people. So I hope you guys can tell a lot of this is like really paying attention, right, to your influencers and to your audience and to your launch team members. And there are things I will scrap in terms of assignments if a launch team is veering a certain way. So if they are always doing the video stuff, well, guess what? We're going to make more video stuff, right? So that's the other thing, is to not always be so set in stone. You can make a plan, but if for some reason you got a whole bunch of people that love Instagram stories, you need to adjust your marketing to maximize that because that's what they're sharing.
You shared a lot of wisdom with us today. And I'm glad Rhonda put a question back in the chat. She had asked it earlier and failed to come back to it. Finding influencers for fiction books. I think we can kind of get a really good idea for nonfiction books, but do you have any hints for fiction books?
Fiction books are a little bit of a different beast because like with nonfiction, we can usually pick out themes, right, of the book. And actually I do that with fiction books as well. I actually try to market to the themes in the book, right? Not necessarily, oh, here's this book about X, Y, and Z, because you really want to appeal to people who are like experiencing whatever the characters are experiencing, right? So that's kind of the first thing. Influencers, if you go about it that way, sometimes I will reach out to other fiction authors in kind of the similar genre. I didn't mention this earlier with influencers, but one of the other ways we look for influencers is actually on Amazon. So when you type in, your book genre or that sort of thing, Amazon does have books similar to yours. People purchase books like X, Y, and Z. And so some of it is filtering through that, to see if you can find influencers that are kind of in your genre. The other thing is I just type in the themes of the book into Amazon to see what pulls up. Again, research is a little manual, but it pays off in the end, right? Yeah. I also, with fiction books, tend to lean a little bit more on reviewers. So if we can find Instagram reviewers, YouTube reviewers, book clubs, that sort of thing, those are more the type of influencers you would look for, in addition to influencers that may have some personal experience with the theme in your book. So to give a practical example, my friend Mary DeMuth, if you know her, she writes on a variety of topics, and a lot of her books center on kind of childhood abuse and sexual trauma because she experienced that as an author, right? And she writes fiction and nonfiction. And so if I had a fiction book that somehow had those themes, I would reach out to Mary as an influencer because she has something in her personal life that relates to that fiction topic in your book, right? So you just kind of have to think a little bit outside of the box of how do you get in front of people that would share about your book in the fiction realm, because it's not as cut and dried as marketing a nonfiction book, right?
That's great. A lot of wisdom. Bethany?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we get this on the recording. So do you have advice for people who, like me, who have a book that's been out for a while and needs a relaunch, perhaps. So like I put in the comments, like you can't do a cover reveal, like people aren't excited because it's already been out for a while. So like what are some tips there, because you don't want it to go out of print. So like if your fear is my book's gonna go out of print, I need to do a relaunch, what do we do?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things. To me, that's operating into kind of the monetization or bulk order stage. So what I mean by that is if you have a backlist book, which is what you mean, like it's released and it's been out a while, I don't tend to relaunch them in the way that I'm describing. What we instead try to do is see what we could package the book with and alternate audiences we can get in front of. So for example, if you have a book that's released and we can create a study guide and training videos that we can then we can pitch it to women's ministry at churches to buy in bulk for their women's group, right?
Right.
So, and we do some of that in pre-launch if we have time, because you shouldn't just depend on a one-to-one sale, right? You need to kind of, especially with your pre-order bonuses, try to tie the increasing level of your bonuses to the number of books, right?
Right.
So if you're a speaker, you could say, if you buy 50 or more books, I'll come speak at your event for free within a 4-hour drive, right? Because you want people to purchase more books, not just like one for themselves or one for a friend. But so we do some of that in pre-work, but we also can do it after the launch. Sometimes we'll do campaigns. So I actually had a book. We did this before, but it kind of applies. I worked on a pre-order campaign for a book kit. It was called the Busy to Best Challenge. And what it was like a snapshot of one of the principles of a book that was about to be released. So I didn't actually work on the marketing or launch for the book itself, that the publisher did that, right? But what the author and I did was create a mini campaign to kind of take people through one of the principles in the book that was releasing, but we were actually seeding and building an email list because a Bible study was coming out after, right? So sometimes you can do little mini campaigns like that. So what I often do are things like virtual summits, which sounds exhausting because it is, but that's why you hire someone to help you to do it. Seriously. I know how to do them, and I hire someone to do it for me because I'm like, ah. But anyway, it's a lot of work. But I will tell you, virtual summits, kind of these mini challenges, like a 15-day challenge on how to brand your message as an author. Like you can do these things to build email lists as long as you have the email campaign set in place to point them to order your book, right? You can do these bundle offers. One of my clients, I just told him to build into his contract. He was like, well, he's a speaker. I said, well, you need to just start pitching a book for every attendee in your speaking contract, right? So instead of saying, can I sell it in the back of the room? He's actually, if it's 200 attendees, his proposal is his speaking fee plus the 200 books, right? So and then your books have a little card that says, please review my book, sign up for my email list. So it's kind of a cycle, So to answer your question, it's really, when I'm looking at backlist books, we're trying to figure out another way to use it. So it could be a virtual summit. It could be a mini course. It could be a workshop you do in person. It could be a speaking topic that you're pitching specifically so that you can somehow offer the book in that context. And sometimes it's finding new marketing audiences, because when we're launching a book, we can really only adequately focus on about 2. But that doesn't mean there aren't other audiences that we could reach out to, right? So,
wow.
Does that help?
You have been a
I know.
Wow.
I even like what you said.
I want to rewind and re-listen to this. Oh, go ahead, Johnny.
Well, I was just to say, even what you just said at the very end there, to focus on 2 markets instead of I think we just overwhelm ourselves because we think we have to do so many different things. But yeah, wow.
Well, you can't reach everybody, and I kind of liken it to, if you're at a speaking event and you say, okay, I would like every woman in the room that has experienced grief to stand up. You probably would get everybody in the room to stand up. And most people market that way. And so the reality is you have to start narrowing them down. Like, have you ever played that game, Have You Ever? Like at a women's retreat, and it's all these really mortifying questions. So it's kind of what you have to think through, you know. So you've experienced grief. Okay, what type of grief?
Exactly.
So it could be the loss of a child. It could be, you know, the loss of a job. It could be, gosh, I have a lot of grief in my own life about God. It sounds weird. But, you know, I walked into faith thinking it was going to be one thing, and that is not the way it turned out. So I had to process that, you know, and so it's really aligning your marketing message with the different types of things people experience. And again, if you focus on 2 of them during your pre-launch, your job is to continually figure out how you can take that same message, that core message, and figure out how to put it in front of new audiences. And you do that by segmenting the types of situations people would be in if they were experiencing that overarching thing.
Wow. Well, this has been great today, and we're running late right now. What we normally do, Lindsey, is invite everybody back on.
Oh, I'm fine. I have time.
Invite everybody back on. Do you have time? Maybe another 5-10 minutes. Let them ask any questions, because I think we did some questions in the chat today. So Absolutely. Come on back on, and as we say every week, if you get back on your video and you can't get it back on, just put it in the chat, because a couple of people, if we take you off video, we have to put you, we have to allow you back in. You're going to be in jail, video jail. So I'll watch for the chat on that way, and we'll let everybody kind of ask questions if they got. We'll take another good 5 minutes here, and we'll go over just a little bit today. How's that? Because this has been great. Lindsey, I think we're going to have you back again sometime.
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
Lindsey, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I was at your website while you were talking. Do you have a blog?
No, because I don't do anything I tell my authors to do.
I want to glean from your blog, because you have so much.
Okay. I'm just laughing because I literally have never had time. I
understand that.
I have in progress how I'm handling my blog, this is random, but just consider this. I am going to do probably a series of 12 articles that talk about my philosophies on marketing, and that's probably all I'm going to do for a blog. So for me, it's more of a core content that I can share multiple places. But for me, I love to do these interviews to get into those nitty-gritty details, because this stuff changes. You know, so that's how I approach blog and why I don't have one. But I do have an email list. But even that, I don't email very often. So this stuff works. But remember, I'm in a different situation than you all are. I run a business. Okay. So my clients come from word of mouth referrals 100%. So in my world, I don't really have to market, because I spend all my time trying to, build relationships. But to answer your question, those articles are coming soon-ish.
So how do we get on your email list?
There should be a sign-up form on my website.
Oh, okay.
But if not, I'll put a link in the comments.
Great.
Lindsey, do you work with children's authors?
I do.
Both the secular and the Christian market?
Yes, the clarification on secular is that I try to make sure that any of those books have a transformational message in them. Right? So okay. It doesn't necessarily have to be faith, right? But I do have a little bit of, I really want to make sure that the books I'm working on and promoting are enforcing positive, helpful change, right? I actually work on business books too, which a lot of people don't see because I don't make a big deal out of it. But they're really awesome and pay bills. So, and it allows me, and honestly, it allows me to do ministry work, right? Because those clients are way, 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 way more expensive. So it allows me to do other books without, being overwhelming from a cost perspective. But yeah, the answer is yes. I do work on secular and faith-based books. That's my cat, if you can hear him.
That's okay.
Everybody always thinks it's a baby, and I'm like, I'm a little too old for a baby, but thank you.
Oh my goodness.
He's going to do it until I let him outside.
Oh.
He's looking at me like, open the door. Anyway.
Do you need to run and open the door? That's fine.
Any other questions?
How can we afford you?
That's a good one.
I'm not that expensive, actually, for ministry. Well, I consider ministry anybody that's not my business books.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so the thing is as you could tell, this is a long-term thing. I don't like, it's kind of funny because there's a lot of perception that I just run launch teams because that's what people see. And I'm like, actually, we've been working together for a year, you know? So the answer is actually dependent on each author. Okay. So if for some reason the whole marketing and launch thing is too much, the first thing I usually remove is the launch team, because I can give you steps to do it, right? Like I don't have to do it for you. I can give you the plan and here's what you're going to say. And, you know, Facebook Scheduler is awesome, right? So there's ways to work around some of that. The other thing is I do have a package that's solely focused on building a lead magnet to build your email list and learning how to connect with influencers, right? So the difference is that's a very specific purpose. The marketing for a book campaign includes everything you're going to do for your book release, and then the launch team. So the way I handle the cost part is we really have a conversation and I evaluate what you actually need at this moment in time. So I'm not a big believer in charging people money just for the sake of it. I will actually tell you, you're not ready for this. We need to do this first, right? Because my intention is to get you to the place where you can be as successful as possible, not necessarily in a salesy way, but really establishing your authority in your topic and reaching the right readers to make it easier to get in front of people who want to buy the book.
Love it. Love it. Any other questions? We've got people's brains on overloads. And yeah, so aren't you glad we're recording this? Because you can go back and listen to it all over again. And I think I'm probably going to need to do that too.
Yeah. And one thing I'll put in the comments, I need to get the link, make sure it's working right, but I do have kind of an overview of a book launch project plan. Again, the key here is this is the base that we start with, and we add to it depending on the author's strengths, etc. I think I could share the link to the spreadsheet. It's a Google spreadsheet, so I'll figure that out. I'm not so technically challenged. Y'all, my husband is part of my business as my technical operations person, mainly because I have no clue how to do anything technical, and he always fixes everything. So he gets paid in cookies, but he's on my he's on my proposal as my technical person. So I'll ask him how to do it. I'm trying to think what else. And I have a new lead magnet that's not done yet. So when it's done, I'll let one of the leaders know, but it's basically a timeline starting with 2 years. Well, actually, it's about 18 months before your release and going after of what you should be focusing on in each phase.
Nice. Yeah.
I just haven't, I wrote it, it's just not designed yet. So it should be about a week or two, I think.
Well, that's all real. That's just wonderful. So we just thank you so very much, Lindsey, for being with us and for all the information you've been so willing to share. And we've had comments in the chat too about people appreciate. I appreciate your whole your ministry focus and in your godly mindset and reminding us that it's not just about us. It's about the message that God has given us to share to others. And we need to remember that and focus on that.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Am I going to be able to see these chat questions after? Because I can answer some of them.
We can definitely save them. Yes, they get saved.
Okay.
So next week, we're going to have Vicki Dorstock with us, I believe, and she's going to be talking about her book launch. We're kind of doing this little series of book launch topics and very specific the things that she has done and has been able to do to help with the launch of her book. When does her book come out, Bethany? Do you know?
Yeah, I know she's under the 10-week mark before the release of book number 1, but they're already doing the stuff for book number 2 because she just for those of you who are thinking about tuning in next week, she got a book deal with Abingdon, and then she like went hardcore on Instagram. She's over 50,000 people now on there, and she got a second book deal for Christmas, like right after. So she's doing 2 launches this year. So I think she's within 6 weeks, 7 weeks of the first book, maybe less. I don't know, but it's soon.
It's soon, yes. And so, if you see well, I'll say that afterwards. All right, we'll see Vicki next week. We thank all of you for being here and just appreciate it. Hang on for the after party. Bye-bye, everybody.